who want for every creator to have an opportunity to bring their creations to the world, get rewarded for it as well. In practice, what we do is we're community founders. So we work with a lot of founders building natively on Near and trying to actually help each other through founders helping founders model.
That was Sasha from the Human Guild. On today's episode, we go all the way back to the founding of Near and the curious way in which all the OG names and big brains that you may recognize eventually cross paths. Then we go deep into a conversation about the meaning of the open web. I really enjoyed this one because he sent me a bunch of resources to read beforehand, so we were able to dive deep, but also because this has been captured in the saying in the vision for Near, a future where users own and control their data. But what does it really mean? With this conversation with Sasha, I was able to break through new grounds of understanding, and I have to say, I have never been more excited. And finally, we talk about Human Guild, what it is, what they do, and in particular, we talk a lot about gaming, the challenges, the opportunities, some of the upcoming projects to be excited about, frameworks for growth, and much more. Without further ado, I'll let you enjoy our conversation with Sasha. See ya! Hello friends, welcome to another episode of the Wild User Interviews podcast with me, AVB. Today, I am thrilled to have with me Alexander Sasha from the Human Guild. Sasha is relentlessly resourceful at Human Guild, host of the Next Creators podcast, and he brings a wealth of experience to the Near ecosystem, formerly formerly sales at I can't say it. Well, whatever. I'll add it to the proper interview afterwards. Welcome, Sasha.
Cool.
Sorry about
Sounds
that
good.
introduction. I'll have to record one afterwards that does justice to all your experience. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your pathway into the Near ecosystem? I know that you've been in San Francisco for 15 years, so I guess there's been a lot of absorption from the tech industry there.
Yeah. How far do you want
Probably
to
as far as we want to go. I have a lot of questions because, yeah, I'll let you go ahead and then I'll fill the gaps.
Cool. Sounds good. So yeah, I came to US 2007, so like 15 years, pretty much almost to the day. Actually, funny enough, it was also roughly summertime at that time. Kind of started new life essentially here. Worked a lot of different odd jobs first, just like normal jobs like mover, work in restaurants, all kinds of things. So my path to Near is very different from like majority of people in early team on Near.
Sasha from the Human Guild. Sasha is relentlessly resourceful at Human Guild, host of the Next Creators podcast, and he brings a wealth of experience to the Near ecosystem. Welcome, Sasha. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your pathway into the Near ecosystem? I know that you've been in San Francisco for 15 years, so I guess there's been a lot of absorption from the tech industry there.
Yeah, how far do you want to
Probably as far as we want to go. I have a lot of questions because, yeah, I'll let you go ahead and then I'll fill the gaps.
Cool. Sounds good. So yeah, I came to US 2007, so 15 years, pretty much almost to the day. Actually, funny enough, it was also roughly summertime at that time. Started new life essentially here. Worked a lot of different odd jobs first, just like normal jobs like mover, work in restaurants, all kinds of things. So my path to Near is very different from like majority of people in early team on Near. Put myself through the school afterwards. So I studied physics back in Belarus. In US, I started from scratch. I kind of went to City College, studied for 2 years, went to Berkeley afterwards for the business school for the undergrad. Didn't learn a lot there, I would say, but it was a good social experience. At the time, business school was preparing people mainly for, at least for the undergrad level, mainly for finance stuff. They were competing like on salary levels. And I guess for them, it was important to move people to ABC, accounting, then banking, consulting. I went for banking, but my primary draw there was technology industry. So at the time I was already getting passionate about tech industry, and I joined Catalyst, working for this legendary investment banker. He started Morgan Stanley Tech back in the day after seeing Steve Jobs and his MBA class and yada, yada, yada. So I like the technology side of working in finance, in technology mergers and acquisitions. I didn't like the finance as much side of it. And then I tried to start my own company after that. So blew successfully through all of the savings while trying to, with my friends, to start online booking software for veterinarians. So I worked in like animal healthcare industry in the startup, and it didn't work out. It was like very hard to do two-sided marketplace. And then after that, decided not to go back to finance and went into sales, business development, worked in MuleSoft. At the time, it was pre-IPO integration software company, 600 people. So when I joined a year into it, I felt like it was too big, and I was looking for something like 10 times smaller roughly. And I was lucky enough to join MemSQL. MemSQL is a database company out of San Francisco. Now it's actually called under a different name. It's called Single Store. They rebranded. It's no longer about mem in memory stuff. And in MemSQL, actually, that's where it went more directly into Near. I met Alex Kidanov there. He ended up becoming co-founder of Near. At that time, he was first employee of MemSQL. He was there for 5 years. He was like already on the way out as I was joining. He was a bit bored, wanted to explore new stuff. He wanted to work on artificial intelligence. At the time, it was very interesting coming up. Funny enough, like now it's also coming up on this kind of potentially big pre-singularity kind of moment for artificial intelligence. But so anyway, at the time he wanted to do this. He pitched it to MemSQL to work on this. MemSQL didn't have opportunity to pin up new like R&D department or something. They're like startup trying to survive at the time. So he left to pursue this, and he was a very curious, smart engineer, hobbyist in artificial intelligence. He didn't have any experience in it. Through his journey in 2 different AI ideas, one of them being consumer app, they were building kind of like AI assistants for the phone. He met Ilya. So Ilya joined that company as a first employee, actually, funnily enough. And so it was also interesting. Alex was trying to recruit somebody else in this dinner, but Ilya was the one who also happened to be at the dinner and was at Google and like really getting bored there.
Is this Near.ai?
Yeah, that's Near.ai. The first one actually was called XIX.ai, and then it became
Is that because
Near.ai once.
Is that because Elon Musk sued them for copyright infringement over his kid's name?
No, but it was a pretty big reason there to restart. So what happened was their first idea, I think it was not really taken off. At some point, they lost interest in terms of the consumer side of it. And so they left the business guy who was building it together with Alex, with all of the money they raised. They actually raised at the time like 400,000 or something. So it was kind of like both engineers left the company, but the company still has all this money. And so XIX continued on its path while Alex and Ilya co-founded Near AI, which was the second AI iteration at the time. And that was the one where they were exploring the opportunity to automate all of the software engineering. So they had this model. They had a lot of questions for ACM, for the competitive programming competition, and they had a lot of answers to those questions. And those questions will be asked in English, and then they would have output in code. So they had a bunch of those labeled as correct.
So that is the prompt actually for this episode, because I was asked last year to do an interview in Spanish with a big Spanish YouTuber. She's from Argentina. And doing my research on Near and Ilya and the team, I went as far back on Ilya's blog post on Medium to find that Near.ai article. And I was reading through it and I was like, okay, so Near, I assumed Near blockchain. But if you go back, this is August 2018, Near.ai, it's mind-blowing. It's like, we have this concept, like there's been some breakthroughs in the technology from previous competitions. So they're entering this international competition with this new idea. And you can see like the vision and the output where it is going. It's, I reckon we can write this code that like just writes code and basically takes out a lot of engineers. I also like the humility of, like, if you follow the progression of the project, like the humility of maybe we were a little bit ahead of time with the idea. Like it wasn't mature enough, or maybe the market wasn't mature enough, which is probably for the best for all of us as they go into Near. But yeah, it's really nice to start putting all the dots together, because I know that a few of you, I think it may actually just be Ilya and Alex Shabenko, I think they went to the same high school in Ukraine. So for a moment.
Yeah, I'll be Yep.
I started doubting like how many of our core outstanding members from like the Ukrainian Russian speaking community are from the same high school. And then I started thinking this high school must be something like the X-Men school or something for gifted children. And they go out there and they start creating this amazing technology. So yeah, just wanted to clear up that you're not from the same school, not from the same area.
Yeah. I'm from Minsk, from Belarus. I've been to Kharkiv once, just passing by. I hope to make it one day there, but right now with the war, it makes it very hard.
And
But
so you all meet in San Francisco through these many businesses.
yeah, and then Alex Kidanov, he grew up in Izhevsk, Russia. So he grew up in this like very small town in Russia as well. He actually grew up close by to Eugene Kuzakov.
Eugene the Dream.
Small town next to him. They actually competed in. Yeah, exactly. Eugene the Dream. I actually just talked to him earlier today. He and Alex, they actually know each other for like a couple decades, if not more. By when they were kids, they were like essentially competing in competitive.
That's amazing. I think it's really good to clear up because the world is very large, and I think it's easy to just put people into buckets. And some people may have the misconception that you're all from the same region and you all grew up together, and there may be some sort of a kleptocracy going on, which is just like recruit from the same circle. But it's good to know that you all actually come from like very different cities, towns, actually countries, and you've met through work. And like that marriage, if you meet at a high level maths competition, physics competition, startups in San Francisco.
Yeah, I would say near overall early team came from a couple different networks. So first of all, there was quite a bit of AI people there. Like, for example, Max was from AI background. He was working, I believe, on this in Google. Ilya, obviously, he was working on TensorFlow at Google. I was there in the right time, in the right place, was one of the first, like, 3, I think, code contributors to TensorFlow. And then there is Bowen, who also was studying AI.
Bowen Wank.
His masters. And
shout out to Bowen, organizing Fake Worse Now, top bloke.
Yeah, and funny enough that when Bowen joined Near, it was after Pivot, so it already became Near Protocol, but he was not told. So he was on the first day of his work, coming from AI, studying AI, coming to work, and people like, you know what, like we're no longer doing AI actually, but you can stick around. And the second part of the network came from MSQL, so that's the database where I worked. There was this guy, Pi guy, he was also early in Near, and he was working in MSQL. He was also actually very instrumental in us getting the first funding for Neo Protocol. Can also tell the story too. And there is Misha as well. So we spent a lot of time convincing Misha to quit MSQL and join Neo. And there was, in a way, some big catalyst for bunch of us joining. So it was this period of time in August of 2018 where the team went from 3 people to 9 people. And
nice. And MSQL officially went out of business, and presumably is now suing us.
Yeah. Actually, there was quite a bit of tension at the time for poaching Misha, but after that, I think Nikita, who at the time ran, there's this whole story also with Nikita, who ran MemSQL, and why he was able to recruit a lot of this ex-competitive programmers, because for their business early days, they need this kind of like skill set. So he built up this big network, out of which then Alex Kidanov.
Amazing. I feel like we're going to have to add like a social graph connecting everyone with little labels. If anyone listening to this podcast wants to do it, I'm sure that we can fund it through the DAO. By the way, I'm creating a DAO for the podcast and getting from them for the marketing DAO. Thank you, Community Fund. I find this fascinating. If there's anyone listening, I'm sure in the future, this will go into history books. I think you've seen they've written a couple of books now from like the early days of Ethereum, and it's just the beginning of a new era and a revolution. Just before we move on to that, why this is a new stage in technology, I'm just really curious if you know how we're doing recruitment now. So we're able to identify some hot spots for top talent that were really well suited for this industry. And I'm wondering, now that the ecosystem is growing, perhaps the needs have also shifted, and are we still able to target and poach developers? Should we have an ongoing presence at these international competitions? Should we be sponsoring? Should we? Do you know much on that side?
Yeah. Yeah, some people think, I know some people from like early near team think that we need to poach from this kind of community, from competitive programming. Then you have like other people who think like it's more about web developer mindset. There's something to be said about this mindset that Paras, like one of the NFT marketplaces on Near, have, which is basically building something very iteratively. So let's just get early users. Like when Paras launched on Near, there was no NFT standards. And they also didn't have Rust skill set. They're just like, all right, like we're still gonna launch. And then a year later, once they had enough volume to be like, okay, maybe we need something more secure, they rewrote it in Rust. Same standard was adopted. They had to make a lot of changes. And I think this kind of mindset really is not a big part of any Web3 ecosystem for some reason. I think the engineering mindset is kind of opposite. It's like, hey, I'm dealing with money. I need to build something very secure, very robust before launch. And so I think it depends on who you ask. Some people will be like, we need more of this people. Then you have people who are like with opposites of that. Yeah, I think generally speaking, we need more diversity. We need more fresh ideas. I think like bringing younger people, generally speaking, is like a really good idea. I think once we actually early days of Near, we did high school hackathon because it doesn't really apply well in a sense that there are not that many schools like this that we saw here in like Silicon Valley, but there was a school where like these kids of 16-year-olds that were doing this AI model on blockchain, but they also like in their free time work in a restaurant to understand how real world is. So like there are people like that. And I think we need all kinds of people. I think business talent is like very much missing in crypto as well. I feel like it's very too skewed on the engineering side.
100%. I agree. And I guess that's why I asked you, because I feel like we're probably both coming in on that like business side, sales, everything that is not like pure tech. But I also acknowledge that there's levels of abstraction. So for instance, if we're working on a project and we identify some of the shortcomings of things that still have to be built, then the question is who's working on this and how many people are out there able to work on this. Like recently, I've been able to learn more about the stake wars and going from phase 0 to phase 1 decentralization and how the shards are going to split and the validators. So I think it's like very specific. And maybe we don't need 100,000 people doing that, but it's certainly not something that everyone can do. That may be different from an everyday dApp, which I agree we should be recruiting much more broadly. And it's really good that we're actually expanding the languages. So now there's JavaScript support, so we can get from a completely different talent pool. Yeah. And I do recall the early days for us because on his story, I enabled I think it was a Near Learn Club. They have a little bot for Telegram that notifies you every time you do a transaction. And I wake up one morning and I was like, holy shit, I've been hacked. I had a bunch of transactions triggered like through my account. And I went in line and it was just Paras migrating to like the new NEP standard and the new contract. So it was all the NFTs just being reminted and stuff. But it was a scare. It was a close call.
Yeah, that was cool. And yeah, again, we need more mindset like this. Another thing for innovation, I think generally speaking, like the way innovation works, I don't know how to really approach recruiting in order to change this for the better, but basically I feel like when people join Web3 industries, they tend to replicate what was already successful, meaning that people see that there's like lending protocol, let's build it on Near, there's like an NFT marketplace, let's build another one. Let's build, I don't know, like Paraskiller or something. I heard it quite a bit in the last couple of months. But in reality, like Near itself was built for different kinds of use cases. It's a very different piece of technology from Ethereum. And I think for Ethereum, the same. It took 6 years of many hackathons. I give a lot of credit to Is Global, to the organization that does hackathons globally in the world, at least before COVID. They were moving at a really crazy pace, one hackathon per major city per month. And with hundreds of people for like bigger ones like Denver, New York, and a couple other ones. And through this experience, they had couple thousands of projects, couple dozen use cases. 95% of the stuff like didn't work. To then arrive to the place where, okay, high value, low volume transaction work. Maybe like lending actually fits well on Ethereum. And this and that work on Ethereum. And so I think that's a process of many years of experimentation. And so similarly for Near, we need to go through the same kind of like years of experimentation. What it requires is this mindset on behalf of new people joining the space to try something new, entirely new use case. Let's build something that's, I don't know, like 2 apps talking to each other and information flowing, and that's interesting, or something like this, or something that's not something that people tried before.
I really like the framework that Nate from Mintbase has. He says the 3 stages of blockchain evolution. Stage 1 would be Bitcoin. I know it's cloned, so you've got Dogecoin, Litecoin, etc. Then you've got stage 2, which is the EVM model, Ethereum and all its clones, Binance Smart Chain, Avalanche, C-Chain, Aurora. He's actually not a very big fan of Aurora. Awkward. And then you've got the third stage, which is a WASM based. That would be a Solana, Near, Polkadot, Cosmos. And yeah, he's very adamant of when you take a step forward, never take a step back. But we do have the challenge of just like the legacy, or I guess in due time, one may call it the baggage of the EVM world. And the truth is, if you read the original smart contract, I guess, manifesto paper by Nick Szabo, he has a really simple, crystal clear example of a vending machine. Like, this is a smart contract. There's stuff inside the machine. There is a price for it. If you put the right amount of money and you select which one you want, the machine gives you the thing. No money goes in, no thing comes out. And it was a simple enough logic and so mechanical that everyone can understand and grasp. Now we're really dealing with much more complex relationships. And I think this may be a really good segue into not only the founding of Near, but the why Near is founded in the first place and the fight for the open web. There are principles in technology. I don't know if this would be called like philosophical technology. Technologists and the cypherpunks, they've been fighting for this for a long time. And I do think it's really important. And I loved all the material you shared with me, because most people would see the normal world versus technology. But the reality is, within technology, there's so many different streams and currents and tendencies. So yeah, maybe I'll let you explain your paper on Richard Stallman and the evolution of software and why open is best and where we're at now.
So for Richard Stallman, what was interesting is that funny enough, so he was idealist, and idealists not necessarily like win, but they might win in the long run. So like open source today is a really big part of like software industry. At the time in 80s and 90s, he was really pushing for this idea of building something that's easy for other developers to look at, easy to modify. He has this four different freedoms associated with software. And so he was really adamant for it. At the time was like Microsoft getting started, and Microsoft was becoming really big. And I was like very antithetical to this. So like free software movement that Stallman started was opposite of what Microsoft was trying to achieve at the time. And so the kind of the state of the world we have today is majority of the data is sitting on a couple corporate servers. And I think that piece actually ended up being more important. The data is more important than software itself. So companies like Facebook, they release open source software from time to time. Like Cassandra is one example, one of the databases that was like open source. There are like many different other pieces of software, like for ML, both Google and Facebook has open source stuff. But what ends up happening is that it's not so much that open source itself rules, but the distribution coming from the data, who controls the data, ends up being kind of like what's important in the world of like web services, essentially. And so what we saw in the last like 20 years, we saw technology first of all taking over a lot of industries, but also within that we had a couple companies like actually taking all of the value from the table, right? And so today we have the world dominated by Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Apple, and pretty much there's like oligopoly.
Better stop naming them, because they're all going to come out to you. You don't want to make too many enemies.
And at some point, actually, Near was like fairly anti one of those companies in its thesis, but one of the early.
If people have been listening closely, they might know which one. Former employer, maybe not. We can cut this bit out.
And so we were told to tone it down by one of the early investors. Don't really publish it, but anyway, I think Near's early ethos was very much centered in also geography where it was started, like Silicon Valley. And so there were certain companies here that actually, we were thinking like, how can we do better? And so the idea of an open web story, it's tricky in the sense that it means very different for different people. If you ask open web what it means for me, I would say very different thing from Eugene the Dream or from Alex Kidanov and other people who were like prominent early days in terms of like open web. The way kind of I think about it, open web is not only software is open source, but also the data The execution part is important, like open state side of it. So like execution of software is open, and we see it in Ethereum with the composability. So people can build insurance application, but take advantage of the fact that Uniswap is running. And so basically you get superpowers as an individual developer, right? In addition to you actually meet financial markets a lot more effectively with blockchain. That's powerful. Some of this blockchain was able to solve. What's not still happening yet is that we're still living in this world dominated by those companies, and pretty much like walled garden. The internet of today is very different from early days of the internet, as I at least remember it. Like late 90s, early 2000s, internet was a lot more diverse in nature. So in my mind, open web is the place where you have like millions of different applications. For example, there's app just for niche audience, like who cares about architecture in San Francisco or something. And there are maybe 10,000 people.
It would be like a historical app,
$1.
like a window in time when we used to build things in San Francisco.
Right, exactly. That's funny, but yeah, San Francisco unfortunately doesn't build much lately.
It is what it is, right?
As well.
That's a really good overview. I actually really liked the article that you sent me. If anything, for that historical piece, it being written in 2019 says a lot, because obviously it's easier to look back at things and it starts falling in place, but it is much harder to go back to first principles and be really critical about the state of things. Identifying what's wrong always comes first, and then is the challenge to try to see what comes later. So in the article that you shared with me, Richard Stallman and the Future of Software Innovation, which I'll be adding to the show notes. People, please read the show notes. I spent so much time on them. Published on Medium and HackerNoon. You basically have the full overview. I feel like I could give this to a total beginner and they could really grasp like where we're at now. So the first thing that I really liked is the shift in barriers of access when it comes to technology. So in the not so distant past, the barriers of access were actually hardware. Do you have a computer where you can code? Do you have internet connections? Can you be plugged into the matrix? But then there was a really subtle shift to the barrier of access actually being distribution. And that is where I feel where the switcheroo comes in, as Australians would say. They switched the goalpost. They switched the metrics that we use. And now we're making software free, but it doesn't matter it's no longer about the software. And this is where I think we really need to double down, because I love that you say that if you ask different core near community members and contributors, they could all give you a different concept for what open web means. I think that may be coming through in, say, some of the town halls, because the line is always there. The vision for Near is a future where people are in control of their data. But it sounds a bit bland. What does it mean? Like maybe everyone is too busy building and not many people are going back to these first principles. And I really liked, the slightly more technical approach of describing what does data mean in this context. Because at least personally, I feel like when we think of data, we know it's valuable. We can see how it's valuable, but we tend to think about it in the ways that it is valuable, say, for Facebook. They own a lot of it and they can use it in valuable ways for them, but we very rarely think of ways in which they are locking out other people and in all the value that we're not unlocking or that we're essentially destroying by them having pure access to it. And yeah, that concept of the shared state or the execution state. I liked it because I felt like I was learning and becoming more technical. I've seen this word state on Ethereum and Near. That makes so much sense. You can have the open source code, but if you don't have any inputs for the code to run, it's useless. So you can start to see how the blockchain being that shared state is amazing. And maybe this could be a really good way to give credit where credit is due and introduce the concept of decentralization as Vitalik described it back in 2017. I know that you include him as a reference on your article, and I think it's still very timely. Do you want to run us through that?
So Vitalik, when he was thinking about decentralization, he mentioned that basically it's a centralized from the logical perspective, but decentralized architecturally and politically. And so what he means by this is that the system behaves like one computer. So it's centralized from that standpoint, but it is decentralized in a sense that nodes are run everywhere. and anybody can run one. And also politically, it's decentralized from the perspective that many people actually control those computers. That then manifests itself to be like one computer. It behaves like one computer. So I think that's
It's fascinating because if you apply that structure, it's just such a simple concept, but also so hard to apply. If we were to apply that to some of the DAOs that we have now on Near, you realize that the DAOs failed the test of decentralization. So the architectural decentralization would be the code itself. Say Astra DAO, okay, that one's there, tick. No one can take Astra DAO down. The political decentralization, how many individuals or organizations are running the DAO, things start to get a little bit dubious. The DAO could potentially eventually die, and it doesn't even have to be malicious. Like sometimes you just lose the quorum to pass proposals, or some factions take over the DAO. Like there's challenges there. The real challenge that we have now is the logical decentralization. So the interface and the data for the decisions to be made, that is not available to anyone else. Any DAO making decisions, we see how they vote on chain, but we don't really know what leads to that decision making. We are in the early days of attempting to improve that. So for instance, for the marketing DAO and in theory, for the creatives DAO, we encourage and require participation on the governance forum and Near, and then we add the link referring to that. But I feel like there's still just a lot of data. Like every time I'm assessing a proposal for the marketing DAO, I have to go on a scavenger hunt, the Twitters and the links and the blog posts, and there's just a lot of data points to try to come up with a decision. So yeah, it's really interesting that from the early days, Vitalik acknowledged that a network where there's a lot of computers, so that if one goes down, the network survives, where these computers are controlled by a lot of different people. So even if whatever happens, there will always be some computers online, but where the data is shared, it's kind of genius.
That's right. Yeah. And I feel like we're still very early days, obviously, both for Ethereum and for Near. So it's, when it comes to governance like DAOs, I feel like it's such a beginning time. We're just getting started very much.
Very quickly getting out of my technical depth, but I think that a challenge that Ethereum would have had early days is that data structure is actually expensive to run on the Ethereum model. So a lot of people have become like blockchain haters because it just doesn't make sense to store data as such on the blockchain. That's why I'm eternally fascinated on the Near ecosystem and the collaborations we have with Arweave, Mintbase. I think we're the first ones to integrate with them. Solana, they're storing all the transactions on Arweave as well. There's a bunch of collaborations with IPFS, Ceramic, natively. We're building Machina. Really keen to see where those storage solutions go and how that improves the data availability.
Yeah, and I think we're going to also run into like limits as well. I feel like with Ethereum, I think it's natural. So there's infrastructure and there's application side of it. And so you build infrastructure, then a bunch of people build on top of it, then they run into limitations. And so for Near, I guess what I'm trying to say, and same for storage solutions too, there'll be a lot more built on those. And then we will then define what are the limits. We'll figure out, okay, what actually goes on chain versus what is okay to store off chain. And they'll be kind of like somewhat dictated by limitations.
Yeah, because the easiest example right now of that interaction on chain would be a lending platform like Borrowcash and a decentralized exchange like Ref. And if you want to make it a bit more complex, you may even add a liquid staking provider like Metapool. If a position becomes under collateralized on Borrowcash, they would trigger a transaction on Ref. So you have the two protocols talking to each other, and there must be an oracle somewhere reporting on the price. And yeah, it's just really cool to enable that, because in the past, and this goes to the aggregation theory by Ben Thompson, excellent article, check out the show notes. There is a tendency for companies to just consolidate in verticals. So normally you have the concept of expanding horizontally. So you basically start acquiring all your competitors and merge, or going up or down the stack. So for instance, in this example, if Borrowcash were not able to communicate with Ref and being able to automatically with one contract call execute that side of the transaction, Borrowcash would inevitably have to create its own DEX, and Ref would inevitably have to create its own lending platform, and both would inevitably have to create their own liquid staking providers. But now you've got Metapol doing its thing, Ref doing its thing, Borrow doing its thing. You've got 3 engines of innovation, and they can communicate automatically with the right triggers. So it's really cool. And I think that's what Stallman was getting to around the pace of innovation with open source. Make sure that as many developers as possible have access to the code, but not in the lazy way that some scumbags in crypto do it, that they just copy paste and have 2, 3, 4, 15 versions of the same thing. The idea is to build on top, to always push the boundaries, to save you 2, 3, 4 years of learning, digest the code, understand it, and then always ask, what's next? What's next? If you see something that is not optimal, pull request on GitHub and contribute. That's how you get hired, by the way, I've been told.
That's right.
Amazing. I think that we've covered the origins of Near and the concept of the open web. I'd like to start going into the more recent past. I know that you were in the funding team for Near early days, and then you moved on to Human Guild. Would you be able to tell us in a few sentences what the Human Guild is and what it stands for?
So what it stands for is we want for every creator to have an opportunity to bring their creations to the world, get rewarded for it as well. In practice, what we do is we're community founders. So we work with a lot of founders building natively on Near and trying to actually help each other through founders helping founders model. So I've started when I was in Near Incubator Accelerator, Open Web Collective, which is a different model. It's more, there's a centralized kind of source of truth. There's a program and people go like work through it. And the other model, this other approach is essentially founders helping founders. In theory, it scales better, but it's also harder in the sense that you want to get potentially competitive solutions, let's say it's a bunch of games, to start sharing information. And it normally doesn't work as well in incubators and accelerators. The kind of culture we're trying to adopt is we're telling people actually early days of Near, kind of stories of what happened there, where Near had actually a YouTube series called Whiteboard Series. And that was, at least on the R&D side of it, before people launched, it was very collaborative. So like maybe today Near doesn't talk all of the time with like Solana and like Polkadot, but back then it was actually very important to share some of the ideas, and Near borrowed some of the ideas, I believe, for data availability from Polkadot, and Ethereum too borrowed some ideas from Near. So there was a lot of
what changed?
cross collaboration.
Like, is it the competitive aspect that people just pulled away naturally, that we just get busy once we launched and we haven't had the time to do it? Is there any reason why we're not doing more of those? Because I find those early videos, even if they're 2, 3 years old, they're extremely informative, and I'll add them to the show notes. Again, I know that we've referenced them many times in previous episodes, but I'm sure that people haven't seen them yet. So we'll keep chucking them in there. Can we get more of those going?
We can actually. There are like maybe different formats that could be done. For example, like at some point I started feeling I actually like scheduled majority of them. So I've been like pretty actively involved early days in that content. But at some point I felt like also it was like a bit saturating in the sense that it was information just for the protocol teams, not for application builders as much. Maybe not all application builders need to know how Near versus Solana work. Some of them do, of course. In practice, not many of them know. But as I think the community of protocol teams, protocol builders, actually like relatively small. It's a couple hundred people, I think, in blockchain. So essentially teams building this like L1, L2 infrastructure. Versus when it comes to application builders, I think there is not enough content that exists for those. And so there's probably plenty of room there to inspire people in terms of what
I'm going to pitch you live. I have an idea. And I know that the regional hubs have a very strong focus on product. I talk a lot with Claudio, and I know that a big component of the LATAM hub is going to be like product labs, so that not only are we training people in collaboration with the education team, but we want to make sure that people that have ideas actually get to build and get that synergy going. So I had an idea for, I guess, like an extra category on my YouTube channel. It would make sense to keep building on the same audience that I've, through sweat and tears, it's over 1,400 now. So the current channel, it's called Alpha Leaks with AVB. And normally I just share videos about new projects and features that I think are getting us closer to 1 billion people, very much focused on like the adoption side and how users can get value out of it. So I was thinking about creating a new series called Alpha Builds with AVB. And the idea would be to get a panel of experienced builders and programmers, so say Matlock here, Eugene, yourself, And then every week we can prompt people to send in ideas for products. And they could even be rebuilds of, say, other projects from other protocols. And we could run through how could it look on Near, both leveraging the user experience. So for instance, I think that the allowance mechanism, where you can just perform transactions within the application that have been pre-approved, and you don't have to approve each, that would be massive for a lot of these applications. But also maybe understand where different components of the tech stack fall in place. And I think that would be really useful for app builders. So for instance, right now, I'm a very strong advocate of the wallet connector. There's a lot of really cool wallets launching on Near. I'm seeing it through Ref. I'm seeing it through Metapool. Neither one of us have the wallet connector yet, but we're looking at integrating it soon. And these wallets are integrating. So I think that the more applications that have the wallet connector, it automatically opens that world. Another example would be some of the early days stuff that I saw, maybe it was Vadim, maybe it was Matt, sharing like the social authentication. I think that is insanely cool. And I don't know how many applications are using it. I know that there's a GitHub repo out there, but the teams that made it possible and pushed it out, they're just so busy that I really do think that it now falls on us as community builders and content creators to put it in front of people. Something that is also super cool, and it's getting a bit more traction, more adoption. It's like the near drop model. It could be the link drop.
Exactly. That's actually interesting. I was talking yesterday to one of the co-founders of LinkDrop. Essentially, what was interesting there is it kind of like in this vein, but it's, for me, it was also lesson in feature versus product, because what happened with LinkDrop and NearDrop is that it's notoriously very hard for Ethereum teams to go and become like multi-chain. In their case, it was hard for them to refocus on other chains. And so somebody on Near built this feature, NearDrop. And so in theory, it's this amazing thing. It's so good for adoption. In theory, like we have 650 applications all built on Near today. Like 90% of them should be using this. It's a no-brainer in terms of the adoption impact, this particular tool itself. But in practice, I actually don't see almost anyone using it. And so it's interesting. It tells you like a little bit about feature versus product. What I mean by this is that there is a piece that was built and it's out there, and maybe some people know about it, but it's out there. Maybe it's maintained, maybe it's not, versus there's a team behind it and actually pushing it and like really trying to get adoption going for this particular tool. And so I was just thinking like how big of a missed opportunity it is. Like we have it, it's out there, and yet people don't use it. And another example of what's missing, I agree that there are plenty of things that are missing, and we can like through conversations like and brainstorms discover, content creation discover those. Like in our world, to come back to gaming, like NFT bridge is like really big need across, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 projects. And yet it's not quite a priority today. So I just actually found a team in New York last week who will be building it. So we'll see how long it will take, but it's got one of those. It's like really need this one, but how
for
do
people listening that may not be familiar with LinkDrop, I'll add the link on the show notes. And in a sentence or two, it's this really cool tool where you can basically preload or prepay transactions for users, and then either through an actual link that they click on, so you can send on an email or on a form, or a QR code that they scan, it prompts them to do the action that has already been prepaid. So for instance, let's say that you're going to a meetup in San Francisco and you've got these QR codes where people can claim a proof of attendance. If they have never in their life used Near, you as the organizer of the meetup can prepay their wallet creation so that in one single user flow, the user can scan, creates a wallet that has been prepaid, and redeems the NFT. So in an experience that you build, and we encourage people to get as creative as possible, we've seen everything from technical events to actual raves in Goa and Tulum. It's a really good way to onboard people. And I feel like once the whole transaction is done, people try to reverse engineer, like, do I have a wallet now? Am I a blockchain user? Is this an NFT? It's so much more smooth than everything else out there that hopefully it is the beginning for people to ask, like, how can I integrate this technology in my product? If I remove all the cryptography and the friction and the approval and the cost, how could it be leveraged? I was going to ask, have you identified any potential barriers, or what would be required for that team to, I guess, be what you call it, more of a product than less of a feature? Is there any, I guess specifically, is there anything on our side? Is it like maybe a grant from Near, and let's just call that core infrastructure? Is it maybe paid features from the user side?
Maybe actually something like grants could work, especially in this market. And I personally think that market conditions will persist for a while. We can also talk about it later, but I feel like value of money at this point in time, capital is like much higher versus where it was like a month ago. So maybe it will take a grant. Actually, yesterday I was talking to the other co-founder of this project. He's building something else now. He's building an NFT wallet. So I was slowly getting to the idea of him actually adding Near as one of the chains.
Is that the co-founder of Link? I give him a shout out. Some people can follow him. Sounds like a prolific builder, adding value.
That's right. It's Artyom Ignatiev. Yeah, he's one of the co-founders there.
Yesterday I was talking to a wallet team as well. Meteor from the Tinker Union project. Pretty cool. I really like their user flow. It's just very simple. It looks like they've put a lot of thought into, if I were a user for the first time. And it's not like contextual information. It just tells you in a real simple way what's going to happen next and what you're doing and what does it mean. And I was talking to them. They're also looking at raising money. And I proposed something that you would probably be familiar with because we're doing something similar for the Human Guild. As you know, we've got Meta Yield, which is a cool way for some projects to fundraise money. So the way that it works for listeners, users deposit ST Near, and the rewards, the ST Near gets locked for a period of time, usually 12 months. And the rewards received from the protocol for the staking rewards go to the project. So it's a really cool way for people to support new projects and, I guess, de-risk the venture in the sense that you keep your original Near and it's only the staking rewards that go to it. Where it gets really interesting is that there are relatively large players that may be staking with us. The first benefit that they get is they support a lot of validators. And I've been going through the statistics recently for Stake Wars. It's actually amazing to see like the bottom 40 validators. Most of them, meta pool is pretty important in their staking percentage-wise and keeping their seed price. So there's a strong incentive for larger operators, could be VCs, could be foundations, to stake through liquid staking. But what I was thinking was, at the moment we have proximity using SC Near to support DeFi projects. Soon we're going to be bringing Human Guild to support games. Correct me if I'm wrong, we can take that out if you don't want to. And I was thinking, we should really strive to create a category for core infrastructure. We could have wallets there, we could have link drops. Through Stake Wars, the foundation is going to be putting a chunk of Near into Metapool anyway. So I think it could be a good opportunity to deploy that. And I love it because I feel like it further decentralizes the network because they don't need any more Near.
Yep.
And if they're going to stake to keep it secure, it's amazing that they could actually give their rewards to newer teams building, especially core infrastructure. That's where the tragedy of the commons kicks in. These are the projects that everyone can use, but no one pays for. So who's building them?
That's right. I agree, actually. Strategy of the commons is a real thing, obviously, in open source too. For decades, I think the person who is doing a really good job on this front is in the Ethereum ecosystem, Kevin Owoki, who is doing Gitcoin. He actually published a couple books about it, being greenfield, this whole idea of public goods being something that people actually pay for and focus on, like public infrastructure. And for Near, also what's interesting is that the way I look at the ecosystem, why I'm excited about Meta Yield is, and we need more initiatives similar nature, is that we actually need to also decentralize the funding side of it. There are two big centralizing points we have today in ecosystem, and it will change over the years, is Pagoda and Near Foundation. And so for Pagoda, I think they're building a lot of good dev tooling, but in the end of the day, I would personally be a lot happier if startups, like actually in every niche, product niche, outcompete Pagoda across everything that they're building on top of the blockchain itself in terms of dev tooling. And then similarly for Foundation, this is almost not the only, but the biggest by far source of funding today in ecosystem. And I think if we want to have Ethereum level of success, we want to have more different ways to engage different kinds of capital in terms of players. And it could be Meta Yield, could be something like Kickstarter, could be something like public goods, like Gitcoin initiative, could be maybe like just getting angels involved to begin with. That's something that we need to get better at. So I feel like those pieces are like very important, both the funding side and the kind of startups doing better on them.
It's definitely worth adding for context that the funding structure has been iterated and evolving over time. Only last week, there's a new post from the CEO, Marik, on the evolution of NEAR. There's been some restructuring at the foundation level, some rethinking and improving on the way that funding flows. So for listeners, as a foundation, they would do grants, usually for larger amounts, more established teams. Then the verticals like proximity, they do DeFi, Human Guild, they do humans. They do mostly gaming. And there's the community verticals at the moment, marketing DAO and creatives DAO. I know there's an initiative to create a dev fund so that there can be more community funding that is more technical. But yeah, it's challenging because when you make a proposal, you obviously have to outline what is the desired outcome and how are you going to get there. The problem is that every proposal has challenges. Like, it's not all been worked out and circumstances change. So it's like, well, how do I make the proposal in a way that it can be approved so we can get this going? But at the same time, acknowledge that it could change. And yeah, like, I studied law, so for me, it's perfectly normal to have a document that goes back and forth 14 times, the exception of the exception. But for some people, it's really weird to have a proposal where there's, okay, here's a plan. And here is the plan when this plan may not work, and the contingency. Yeah, it's interesting. I know that the foundation is bringing in a lot more like banker professionals and auditors, and I guess they're putting in some structure for funding that may not be very Web3, because in the past it's just been an absolute shit show. But yeah, I really do hope that we get to keep improving on that. I do love the Gitcoin model, and I'd love to get a shout out to James Waugh. He's moved on to another ecosystem now, but he's been a very strong advocate of that public goods funding. He actually listed several of the NEAR challenges on Gitcoin. I'd actually like to revisit what the NEAR presence is on Gitcoin now, and we should definitely reconnect with them or build our own. I think you were pushing for us to build something similar.
Yeah, there are things being incubated on that front. Somebody else was actually pushing even harder for that. Yep. And then when it comes to actual Gitcoin, NEAR have done a couple of hackathons with them. I believe, Gitcoin is also like partnering with quite a bit of chains, different ecosystems now that they used to be incubated, I believe. And now they're more like independent entity that needs to figure out its own business model and get more customers and that kind of stuff. And so I think they're actually like a lot more open towards like working with other ecosystems. Let's see, should we go back to game?
Yes.
Should we discuss it?
That's why I shared the document with you, because I know that you're more structured. No. So yes, going back to the Human Guild, before I let you talk about the games in the pipeline, there were two things that I really liked from the website. The first one was the overall aim or objective, which you've already stated, but it's worth mentioning again. We want every human to be rewarded for bringing their creations to the world. That was really inspiring, because I think that it goes to the subjective element of the potential within the individual and encouraging people to really be unique and to maximize what only them can do. There's no need to be copy pasting other people. And that's where I feel that when you ask people, what problem are you trying to solve? They really should look deep, both inwards and around them, and have a response. The byproduct may be that you make money out of it. That's fine. But the problem that you're trying to solve shouldn't just be your bank account, because that's what you probably get from like forking, be it an NFT project or another project. So I think that focus on the individual is amazing. And acknowledging that historically, maybe people were deterred from looking deep inwards and outwards because it was just harder to do. So this enabling vehicle, I feel like it's very inspiring. Obviously, I am extremely grateful because we have been recipient of the Human Guild grant through Misfits, and most recently, Ollie also has a new, very exciting secret project that is also being enabled by Human Guild. Yeah, I can see the effects out there in the world. Very soon, we'll be going into the steamy hot pipeline of, last time I heard, 59 games. But before we jump into that one, the second line that I really loved, and will probably make it the opening of the episode, was an open invitation. Are you tired of waiting to make something happen? Come build with us. So I love that builder ethos, and yeah, just encouraging everyone to join the community and learn from each other. And if it's not there, someone has to build it, so it may as well be you.
That's right. Yeah. I think in general, that's a big kind of holy grail of Web3 is to get to a place where people building something that's unique to them, that brings value to other people. That's the essence of sustainable economy as opposed to Ponzi is to build something value added to it, but then also importantly getting paid for it. And so I think what we saw in the last 10 years is that you have companies like Heroes in Silicon Valley, like Roblox, and then you have Minecraft, who really unleashed creativity in the last 10 years. They brought so many people into this creative pursuits, but the economy side of it is not great. It's like these large corporations. One of them is owned by Microsoft, Minecraft is, and then another one is a big public company now, and they like really not going to change anything they do. And if you look at kind of economics of it, I think Roblox takes 83% or something like this, with everything set and done from the creators. And I think Web3 is this promise that what if we take this creative spark and encourage this creativity, same way how these guys did in the last 10 years, but actually get creators to get paid. And that's for digital creators, but also it applies to artists, musicians, like all kinds of creators out there where the internet kind of happened. The internet exists for a couple of decades, and yet there's only one particular creator who gets paid really well, and that's software engineer. And like the market rewarded one particular creator in a sense. And then you have the rest who like before Web3 kind of like just had Instagram to get followers, to then monetize it somewhere else somehow. Is the kind of musicians do merch mostly as their like main thing. Artists sell through galleries. Comic artists go to Comic-Con in San Diego and has to convince this one guy that like their comic is worthy to be put in this distribution. That's what actually like, literally somebody from the ecosystem did. He went for 15 years to Comic-Con to convince this one guy. And I think Web3 is a promise that we don't need this. Like you can, the market is there. You can just put your stuff there, but also you need to build your own brand. You need to build your audience. It's only like maybe 1% of creators still get it. That you also, it's not just about creation. You need to build the distribution side of it. The kind of this proverbial middleman had not only capital, but also distribution. And so now the challenging thing is like now, like how do we build distribution? Are we building it on our own or creating like bands of people, kind of musicians in Portland together working?
That is such a good point, because it is very easy to get excited about the new world and ignore the fact that in the old world, these middlemen, they do create some value. They do some work that the artist doesn't do. I feel what the issue is the distribution of the value is completely out of whack. So the first thing would be, technically, the artist can do the distribution and the brand building, and in some cases, they actually do most of the work. But in theory, that's what the middleman does. But most of the payment for both the creation of the content and the branding and distribution goes to the middleman. So I do feel like this is an exciting time to be able to rebalance those forces. But the savage truth is, it does place a big burden on the creators to start doing all these things that they have traditionally not done. And while some content creators are extremely business savvy and they're all billionaires now, like Kanye West and Rihanna, some are just not very good at it. Some are much more happier and they just thrive in like the creative abstract world. Like it's their subjective output that people enjoy. It could use some assistance. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there for collaboration among artists and maybe finding new ways to match skills, etc. I think the core of the distribution element, and I always like coming up with weird parallels, is say that you wanted to start an online shop, but you had to convince the internet to list your website, or that you had to convince the post company to carry your packages. Like that would be ridiculous, right? Can you imagine how many people would be missing out on starting an online business if there was this random middleman that could just refuse to literally distribute the work? So I feel like this is a game changer. It definitely has been for the last 20 years. The stories that we're seeing now from like Instagram and mostly TikTok and any social media, people going direct to the audience and being able to grow. It's amazing. And yeah, I think that Web3 takes it to the next level. But back to gaming. Why game? Because I guess why Human Guild? Because I think it's a very broad name. Some people may think it's like a human trafficking guild. Not kidding. Why Human Guild? And then why gaming is one of the core focus?
Yeah, so human in the name there is because we wanted to put a focus on human like in crypto, basically, there's a lot of focus on money. So it's more about like money side of things. Let's build something like in monetary system. Our naming has human in it to focus on this creator one, the human who gets to create and then reap the benefits of it, as opposed to like money side of it. So it was more like in that context. When Human Guild started, we were more broad. We did not focus just on gaming. And roughly in the summertime of last year, it was still very early for Near ecosystem. We saw on Paras that there was roughly like 12 or so attempts by creators to create games. So they didn't have skills. They didn't have like game dev skill, but they're building almost like this like card game, like trying to be aspiration, like trying to be card game, but not quite card game because something was missing, but there was like this interest. And so we saw this organic interest. We wanted to kind of double down on this. And so we started doing some game jams. And so game jams is something similar to hackathons where the output, unlike any kind of project, the output here is a game. And so I started researching on independent game developers like in indies and how they live their world. Turns out that majority of them in US live below poverty line. So they actually essentially swap the creative freedom for stability. They choose freedom over stability and not go to Ubisoft or Unity or like any other either gaming studio or infrastructure company and just work for themselves. And it's just very hard and lonely place. And they work on their creation for many years. And economic side is just like horrible. They tend to not do, generally speaking, but they have this huge community out there. And Game Jams is what kind of like unites those communities. Who did really good job on this in a Web2 world is this developer from San Francisco. He started the website called each.io, as an each to create each.io. And so he has like game jams just happening nonstop all the time on the website. And we started doing a couple of those when we saw this organic interest and in Paras on creating games on Near, even though the skills kind of like were missing there. And we were able to get a couple of like really interesting independent game developers directly from Web 2 just into Web 3 through this. And then we started doubling down on this. We started getting organic interest from like smaller studios. Like now it was not just indie game developers, it was smaller studios who were approaching us. I think some of it was like timing related because last year was this X Infinity was blowing through the roof and there was all of a sudden a lot of interest in Web3 gaming. And so we saw a lot of like studios joining and we started working with a lot of those. And kind of one thing led to another. It ended up being kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy. More founders starting coming to us. And people started referring to us as this gaming guys in Near. So it ended up being kind of like became more and more niche over time. I think we're not like entirely focused on gaming today. We have like music marketplace we've incubated. There are some virtual worlds, no code platforms, like all kinds of things. But that's ended up being like a pretty big.
I was going to ask what the relationship between Human Guild and the Near Foundation is, as in where does the Human Guild funding comes from? Are you guys for profit, not for profit? What is usually the arrangement with the projects that are incubated?
Our relationship is not with a nonprofit. We took a grant from Near Foundation. Yeah, it's kind of like interesting experience growing nonprofit, like thinking about that side of, do you want to build sustainability model in this? Do you want to build scalability model in this? In our case, we're on very lean, very small organization. Our DAO is like 10 people. At this point, we have a couple of people from community helping us and we're like nonprofit essentially. So quite a few times people tried to give us different parts of like rewards back to us and we didn't take them. It's kind of like a bit miss, but we would focus on giving in this case. So that's how it's structured. Yeah. And another piece is we haven't productized anything. So Vlad has a couple projects he's working on. There is Neuralens, there is Web4 he's building, but it's not a core part of this. It's more like it's his own like passion projects and he wants to pursue them, but in a very like his own timeline.
I love that term, passion projects. That's nice. I am a lawyer in Australia, but I'm not in the business of giving out legal advice. I am not an accountant, but I do feel it's interesting that sometimes there's a misconception from the general public, and I'm not implying that would be the case here, that not-for-profits can't make money. Usually the not-for-profit model is
Right.
at the distribution of the profits. So the not-for-profits can indeed have sources of revenue. In fact, they're encouraged to be sustainable long-term. It's just that the money stays within the organization. There's no distribution to the owners or the operators in the same way that share royalty distribution would be. The money just stays within the organization to keep being utilized for the specified purpose. So in this case, I'm assuming Human Guild would be to grow their Near ecosystem in a certain number of ways. And any money that goes back into the organization can be repurposed for that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but there was a tweet. I don't even remember whose tweet it was. May have been Pando from Decentralisation. I don't know. And I saw it live. So I caught you before you deleted your reply. I think your reply was, yes, I'd love to debate AVB on for-profit versus non-for-profit models. And I was like, yeah, that'd be a great debate. And then the tweet was gone. So we won't have to go into it now. But yeah, I just want to highlight that if the Human Guild can make some moolah, go for it.
Yeah, an interesting thing here is that also the other side of it is if you think about incentives, I feel like for-profit model in a way puts you in, for example, when I think about for-profit, I think about startups. Maybe it's because I'm like biased living here in Silicon Valley, but in startup world, you're pushed against the wall. And if you don't have funding coming through, which early days it's through the funding, but funding goes away in periods like this, you need to become extremely resourceful, right? You need to figure out how to still make money, how to get users in a cheap way, kind of like backed against the wall. You have people relying on you if you have like bigger team. And so hopefully there are some teams that will be able to figure out the way out of it and figure it out. Basically becomes this necessity is a mother of invention in a way. Non-profits in a way can be also very different in terms of how efficient, call it, they are, because nonprofits can receive funding and then they make decisions on like how to distribute this funding. The example of nonprofit comes like some like local government we have in San Francisco. It has like 13 also billion to give away.
Crazy.
So their incentives are very, very different. Yeah. And so the question is like where this money goes and like how, like who works there and how do they spend their day? It's probably very different from.
I think you'd be surprised that most of the money goes to the people that work there. But anyway, no, I think 100% correct. And over time, you realize that profit or not for profit, the most valuable thing is focus. And then the second most valuable thing is cash. If you don't have cash, you're in a very bad place because it's just needed to operate. But if you don't have focus, then you're not operating essentially. So I do agree that every organization and every team need to take the measures necessary to be able to focus on the mission at hand. I recall when Elon Musk wanted to take, I think it was Tesla private, and he's like, public markets are a problem because if the stock is down, employees are depressed and they can't focus. And if the stock is up, everyone thinks they're rich and they can't focus. So it doesn't help us. We're not really worried about the price of the stock. We're worried on building the cars and pushing the boundaries of technology. By the way, all of Tesla technology is open source. And every time that he's asked about competitors, he's like, I don't care. This is the point. We want to push the entire industry to run like Tesla. So it's a fascinating perspective. I feel like there's definitely a lot of parallels there with Near and the foundation. We don't talk about price. It's not a priority and it should not be, even if people's personal wealth may be tied to it. We have a mission at hand. And I was only mentioning it because I've come across some not-for-profits that they are actually deterred from going into a relationship if there's any source of revenue in it for them. So I guess that would be the exception of you don't want your organization to run on a purely profit-seeking model. But if there is an opportunity, also don't turn it down. Like it's not illegal, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. Sasha, I'm going to run to the bathroom again. Embarrassing. But when I come back, I'd love to jump into the game specifically. Tell me which ones are you most excited about? What are the traits of good teams and game developers? For people that are interesting, where can they go and learn the skills? Do you have any more game jams coming up? That and much more in 1.5 minutes.
Cool. Sounds good.
And we're back. So what's the pipeline sitting at the moment? Still 59?
It's a bit bigger. I think overall we gave 100 or so grants. Games. Yeah, the games are like 50, 60 of them. Majority of them still in development. It does take time for people to launch. Game into mainnet has to do with complexities of design economy, the legal side of it, the sheer complexities related to launching the game itself. I feel like launching the game on its own is very challenging. So I feel like we have a couple teams who iterate very quickly and launch games like very quickly in this like vibe of early like mobile games. They're like mobile teams who like would just like launch game every 3 months and kind of see what sticks and kind of continues, moves on to next games. Like in our case, we have Pixel Dabs, like Daniel and his friends who built many different projects at this point. There's Pixel Pets, There's Crypto Hero, there is Change in Tactics, there is G they're building. That model also has its own pros and cons because it's very hard for them to improve the existing game because they're like already running the next game. But they've been like really amazing at launching quickly. I think our bias is to really get people to launch quickly, but in practice, it ends up being like fairly complex with the games, especially when they interact with open economy. Building sustainable economy, generally speaking, is not something people have done yet in Web3 gaming. I don't think anybody would say that Axie was an example of sustainable economy. So there are challenges on that front. We have 90% or so of those games still in pipeline, still in development, and the launches also take time. Yeah, and delays happen. Like with Near itself, when we were studying in August of 2018, our plan was to launch World Startup Series in January of 2019. So there was this idea that next couple months we're just gonna may not go, and then once you get into
Only delayed about 12 months. Yeah, I love it. I get really excited about gaming on Near because I feel like games are that one thing that gets the next billion users. The challenge that blockchain has had up until now is that it is very dependent on price and speculation. So during the bear markets, users go away because they're deep in the red or there's nothing to speculate on. And then during the bull markets, there's a lot of like dodgy things going on, which may actually damage the reputation of the industry. So it's hard for a sustainable ecosystem to develop in those conditions. I like that Near never really had a super aggressive pump, so we didn't get to speculate that much, like leverage trading and all those things. The NFT space also was much smaller. And I feel like there were some rugs, but a lot of the teams are actually pretty cool that have the community, some are building. And yeah, I think that gaming is that one thing where it hits a sweet spot. Users can have fun. They can come back day after day. They don't need to know that Near is the underlying tech stack that powers it. They don't have to care what the price is. And it really pushes for hopefully more development, more adoption, like more transactions going through. We can see how the network behaves. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, likewise. I think I completely agree in the sense that we need to be striving for the use cases that have to do with utility. Some of this like open web use cases, once they are there, I think there'll be a lot more utility focused, less so speculative focused. And gaming is example of that too. Is like, I'd like to think of gaming as a kind of how people thought about gaming for the last couple of decades, form of entertainment, same as movies and music. People pay for this to spend time and doing something fun. There's no expectation of getting paid. Play to earn, I think, will be a big part of the games, but the gameplay itself will be even bigger part.
The main challenge here is you can never pay people enough where it is worthwhile to play to earn cash. What you have to earn is reputation, status, something rare, some magical item. It may not actually have any value in the real world, but for the people that play the game, that's rare. It's kind of like a medal in the Olympics. The medal itself, it's probably not worth much. And I don't know if they get a prize money, but just the fact that you have that one item that no one else has. I also really like the grassroots approach of going with indie developers, identifying both the source of talent and I guess the problem that they're facing in terms of being able to fund and monetize their creation. It's like the underdogs. I see it like an underground rebellion of indie developers. And it seems like the movement has progressed successfully to the next stage of like small studios. So I guess that my question would be, are there any suggestions on how to reach these indie developers in other regions? So say there's people listening to us from Europe, from Australia, from anywhere in the world. Where can we try to tap into those indie developers over here and let them know that there's this community that can support them? And I guess the same question would apply further up the stack. How do we identify and connect with small studios, present them to the Near ecosystem? Are there plans for moving further and further up the chain until we have the big dogs developing on Near?
Yeah. So when it comes to independent game developers, I would say two big places where they hang out is those game jams. That's number one. And game jams, there are a couple different ways you can do it. You can sponsor a game jam that does have a big distribution and be like a Web3 partner in it. And it kind of becomes like self-selection. So there's a group of people, maybe like 5-10%, of the total amount of participants, whatever it is, who actually gravitate towards this and actually would do something about it. And it also indicated they're like mildly curious about Web3. And by the way, in gaming, Web3 is there's quite a bit of tension when it comes to Web3 for whatever reason. And so then you end up working with those people, right? You like then focus on this 5-10% who participated. Another way to do it is to run your own game jam. Then the challenge there is more like distribution, how you're going to be over time getting those developers to participate. We've done both. I think the important piece across game jams, generally speaking, is consistency. Similarly to hackathons, like when it comes to East Global, for example, they actually know that the only one thing they care about is retention. They know that it takes 4 different hackathons for a developer to come through to then feel comfortable enough to build on solidity in their case. And so they learned it through this years, and it's an incredibly long-term strategy because like you do these hackathons, maybe person will come twice in 2020 and once in 2021. And by 2022, they finally get their 4th one and finally do some project on Ethereum. And so similarly for game jams, so like new ecosystem, it does take quite a bit of touches. So what we noticed is that you can engage somebody, they build a couple of different hacks with you, and then 6 months later, they finally got to, maybe it's timing, maybe something percolated, they read more about it, but now they're like ready finally. And so like the key there is to be consistent, doing it like kind of like over and over again. Another place is forums. So there are like forums related to different game engines, and Phaser is one example. Godot is another example. And so people spend time there. And so you can find game devs there. They hang out also in different Discord servers. There's some Discord servers that aggregate indies, and student organizations, probably another good place to find them. When it comes to studios easier to find. They're open for business. They usually have the website, kind of professional presence. They have email or whatever means of communication they have. So like with studios, it's a lot easier to get in touch with them. The question there, when it comes to studios, they have less freedom to explore things. They usually work on particular budget. And so for blockchain, for them to make sense to build Web3 game as opposed to the game that they're used to, it has to be something very compelling. And with studios, I think what I see, generally speaking, is that gaming is extremely saturated. There's so many games out there. It's like very different from early days of like internet when I was like actually seeking out games. I was like, all right, like what do I play? Today, it's very different. It's so many games. And so some studios, they're finding on their own that, okay, be it Steam or be it mobile platforms like Apple or Google, it's just too many games. How do I stand out? I understand everything about the business of building the game. Like you pay $3 to get a user. Here's where you acquire them. Advertisement works like the best for user acquisition, the other. But at the end of the day, it's extremely competitive on the other side of it. And it ends up being replicating Hollywood model in a sense that there's a big launch and more likely than not, you're not going to hit your box office goals. And so then you have this like small fraction of teams who are like, all right, I'm going to try this other world, which is nothing figured out in this other world except for it's not competitive. If I actually launch and I have the skill set, I've built games before, maybe I'll go and compete in this new greenfield medium. And so people with this mindset, they're like ready to go and explore. Speaking, the bigger game studio is, the more constraints there are around budget. It comes back to this idea of what we talked about, the middleman. It's in the world of art, it's the art dealer. In the world of music, it's a music label. In the world of games, it's a publisher. And so publisher is the one that kind of gets to decide usually what game is being built in the first place, how much money, who gets, what's the revenue stream looks like later in terms of distribution of it. And so the bigger budget requirements are, the harder it is to work with a game studio. It's probably easier for some other ecosystems out there, like Polygon, like Solana comes to mind, who like more kind of loose with the kind of funding they have, or maybe more like less careful, more active, aggressive about it. And I think Near historically, at least for the last 4 years, was very consistent and like more disciplined approach, which makes it harder. It's like, it's not, you cannot like when somebody was just giving them a bunch of money or something. But also it ends up ends up not in practice being, as you mentioned earlier, like a big like motivator for people, right? If people just motivated by money, then inevitably run into a bunch of struggles through the development. They might just give up and quit. But yes, I think generally speaking, that's how we find it.
That's a really good strategy. And I hope that people listening, if they're interesting, adopt some of that playbook. Obviously, go to the Human Guild Discord and connect with people and share the communities that you're reaching. Do you guys have any more game jams on the pipeline for the rest of the year?
Yeah, we likely will do one late in the year. We might do gaming section in a hackathon that Near is doing around NearCon. But as far as our own game jam, that'll be like later in the year. Yeah. So that's on
And I really like
front.
share the metrics learned from the Ethereum community on how many touch points it takes to convert someone. I feel that's especially useful for funding because we don't really have much data to fund things. And there may be a bias to just want to see like immediate results or be too quick to judge something when we don't know if it's working or not. I can see how hackathons, conferences, they can all have the same problem or feature set. I'm also looking in content, especially something like a podcast, right? YouTube. We're giving out grants from the marketing DAO for content being created today. But, and I'm going to be extremely selfish and biased, but obviously it's the things that I've got more information about. This podcast, I see these episodes as being timeless. So while it may only be funded today, anyone can listen to it months into the future. And as the ecosystem grows, that's where the touch point and the conversion comes in. So it's really good to have that awareness that we just have to be very active, getting in front of people, giving them the tools to play around, being very flexible to enable them to dip in and out. And yeah, I guess it'd be a very fine line between it is normal to have 4 conferences or 4 hackathons or 4 podcasts for them to be activated and trying to optimize, like, can we make it 3 instead of 4 or...
Yeah, and I think on the content side, what's interesting when it comes to mind, that's a little bit not as related, but what's very interesting, like I got surprised by this recently in terms of content is I have a team of friends. I met them actually in the first hackathon that Near did back in 2019, I think. They were building this little app called Pinky Promise, kind of like you make promises to your friends to do something and then hopefully you'll follow through, and it's on blockchain. But fast forward to today, they are working on no code platform. They started with Web2, they already connected also Ethereum. They're going to connect Near in 4 to 5 months from now. But what was interesting is that one of the apps that was built with their no coding platform is a very simple app that prepares people in US to pass citizenship test. And citizenship test in US is like very kind of like formulaic and also like relatively simple, I would say. But what they did is, so they somehow figured out that there is a content gap in terms of this particular topic. And so they created this very short videos, which is, are you ready to become an American citizen? What is capital of the United States? Is it San Francisco? Is it New York? Is it DC? And so they start getting this like insane amount of like views. I think they on average get like 5-6 million views per one of those. And they have an insane amount of like comments on them. And so now what they have is they just added the kind of the banner saying like, hey, if you want to actually go through this, there's an app for it. And you just click here. And so their app completely organically gets like insane amount of traffic. And one of the top
so smart. What's the name of the no-code platform? I actually played with no-code a couple of years ago, and I love it. For a non-technical person, I love how, once again, levels of abstraction, you enable people to do more without knowing about the more granular levels of the technology. And I think that's where we have to go, in the same way that we have no idea how mobile phones work, but you can do everything imagined on there. There's the building side of things.
Yeah, I'll look up the name for you later. What's interesting about the no-code platform, we're like actually like really bullish at Human Guild on trying to find as many no-code platforms to be incubated in Near as possible, because what was interesting when I was talking to at some point earlier with NFT creators, I have a survey I did in roughly 300 NFT creators. What's very interesting about NFT creators, let's say from different other creators, physical world creators, is that NFT creators 1 and 4 is actually technically minded. They actually want to learn how to code, in addition to their like art being their main skill set, but they also have the idea in mind of what they want to implement. And all these ideas can change and everything, but the idea here, like that people actually want to learn how to code and want to build something in Web3. And so if only there was like no code platform that allows them not spend 2-3 years trying to learn beginner stuff, but actually get moving a lot faster. And I've met a lot of people like this in your ecosystem as well. And so
my commitment to you, and I'm going to try to be more diligent with this one following up than all the videos about games in Near that I owe you. I met some good friends, some good contacts in the no-code space. I think it was just before I got very active with Near, so it would have been early 2020, doesn't matter. I'm more than happy to bring one on the podcast and I guess introduce the no-code world to the Near ecosystem and hopefully get people excited. And it'd be really interesting for me to try to present to him what Near is and blockchain and like basically a meeting of two worlds. and once again, try to capture in a timeless conversation and replicate it as much as possible. A couple of questions that I have about no code. I know that for the platforms that I've played with, what they've done is they've modularized the platform. So all the most popular components you basically have. So you can select them and mix and match them on a screen. And then there's conditional logic. So you can basically literally link from this box, it goes to this spreadsheet, you can see your data. And then with certain actions, the data modifies. And then other components just display the data on the spreadsheet kind of thing. So what I find really interesting is that I'm just trying to see how that connects to the Web3 world. So my question would be, will the no code be a front-end solution and it connects to existing smart contracts? So hypothetically, I could use, what's it called, near names. It'd be amazing if I could build an entire new front-end for near names I own, even like the branding and everything, the user flow, etc. But it's the same smart contract. So at the end of the day, they're doing the same 2 or 3 functions.
Mm.
That would be, I guess, the earlier stages, because I do wonder, like my mind doesn't quite compute how we could get to the point of building like smart contracts from scratch using no code. Where do you see the evolution of that, or where are we at?
We're definitely very early, generally speaking, on that. But I agree that there is probably a difference between allowing people opportunity to build like front ends very quickly to allowing people opportunity to do like full stack apps very quickly, and also then figure out the smart contract and building new ones from scratch using no code platform. I'm not sure if that's possible, but I think there isn't a possibility at the same time to maybe like showcase people what are the smart contracts that even exist. On year today, I think we have, I'm forgetting exact number of smart contracts, but I think the idea is that the more you have, it kind of like the amount of things what's possible grows exponentially from there, right? Like you have this tool, these pieces, and if only like people were able to understand how many of them are out there, first of all, and it's fairly easy to find, but also what can you do with them going forward, combine them in different new way. I think the surface area of like innovation goes exponentially from there. But actually not that person task in terms of like how it
100%. And that is a trend that I think that we really need to highlight and get people excited and thinking in those terms. I had a conversation with Nate from Mintbase. They see themselves as core infrastructure, and we're already starting to see people building on top of the Mintbase stack. So Gorilla Shops would be an early example, and there's more coming. Ref and Metapool, I know that they're both moving towards the integration and referral model. So basically anyone can pop up their front end using the ref stack and they get the referral fee. Same with Metapool. We eventually don't want to have our own dashboard. We want to be fully integrated with our partners and they get part of the fee. So it's definitely the first step to raise awareness about the smart contracts out there that you could build a front end for, whether it's a direct partnership with the team or whether it is all the early day applications that Matt Lockyer developed. Like for instance, there's near names, there's token farm. There is one that he did for like generative code, which is super cool and trip. There's a lot of things being produced by the Near Learner Academy, the boot camps. There's just so much raw code out there. So these devs are very busy. They move on. It was a side project, but that would be really cool, especially if we want to start testing the waters. Like I know that no code can do front end beautifully. Maybe let's try to find some people that can help us connect that front end with the Near blockchain, with the SDK. We need to look into it again. I know that they've been expanding all that functionality, but yeah, what a bright future we have ahead of us.
Generally, there's also a lot of value in like connecting the dots because there's so many people building stuff on their own, in their own kind of silo, on their own free time. And I feel like when ecosystems like this grow, there's a big question of like, how do this all people communicate actually? How do they come to, yes, we have like NearCon, that's great. That's where people like will meet in person once a year, but how can we go like beyond this? And actually, is it the case that people need to go back to forums? It's like forums seems like to be good, more structured communication as opposed to like Telegram channels and million of Discord servers. But then also people haven't used forums for the last 20 years on the internet. So it's like tricky to figure out what is the right communication pattern. But I think one way or another, we need to figure it out to start connecting some of these dots. So people start like working together more. And that's just naturally a big challenge.
There needs to be a Venn diagram between community and like builders and developers. Like the sweet spot is the middle. Because if you have pure raw community, and that's a challenge that we're seeing with the marketing DAO now. We have a lot of communities that have recurrent funding every month, and we're just trying to find a way to cut them off because we're just asking them, how does this get us closer to 1 billion people? You guys aren't building anything. There's no one within your community building anything. If I were to ask you what Near has developed in the last 6 months, you have no idea. What projects you're building on Near for the last 6 months, you have no idea.
Yep.
This is not what I feel community funding should be going for. And yeah, it's a challenge. I do feel forums are making a comeback. I also do feel like we're in a hyper-social stage post-COVID, which is ironic because now everyone's getting COVID again. But Sasha, I am mindful of your time. And there's one question that I want to bring us back with the gaming world. I know that Apple did something really interesting around creating like an Apple Games membership so that by paying the monthly fee, you get access to a bunch of games within their platform. Apple Arcade.
Yep,
Yeah.
Apple
Can you tell
Arcade.
that I'm not a gamer myself? I got the first subscription when I bought my new machine and I never used it. It's actually expired already. But I guess my question is, there would be two aspects there. One would be the business model. We don't have to dive into that one just yet, although it'd be fascinating for people in the industry to think about it, maybe bundling some games. But the second one is what I'm most interested in now.
Yep.
Around the distribution channel. Do you see scope for creating that kind of Near Arcade? Oh, it even sounds sick. Creating a Near Arcade where we can very easily showcase all the games and just have visibility, bring the gaming community, have examples of what can be done for new developers, new studios.
Yeah, so actually we have arcade themed Near Hub. So Human Guild has pretty much it's like themed like arcade inside of Near Hub, as well as when it comes to Near Con, we are also planning to essentially have arcade-like experience there. It will be not actual probably arcades with the game inside of them, but it will be like a bunch of laptops that people essentially like games will be staged there, but people will be able to try the games essentially. And I feel like maybe one day the whole concept of arcades will come back in some form. But yeah, that's definitely the direction we're thinking about.
That is amazing. I am looking forward to NearCon. Are you guys using like brand new laptops? You're renting them because those laptops are going to get hacked the shit out of them. Don't put your personal laptop there.
Right. No, yeah, it's not going to be our personal laptops. I think every game will bring their own, but we'll have people like, watching.
Those private keys are gone.
I think that's...
Sir, please, security first. Security first. Don't join the Wi-Fi.
Yep. So last NearCon was actually like fairly barbaric in a sense that people didn't have like much over like physical, like graphicals and booths and anything like this. But at the same time, even in the first NearCon, people were able to play a couple games. There was Hash Rush there, so people were able to play strategy. There was Battlemon, the first version people were able to play, and there was Robots. So they were able to like at least look at it. It was not playable, I believe, but were able to like chat to the founder, kind of look at the demo version of it. So we had of those last NearCon, and we're going to have like 10 to 15 to 20, depending on how many people make it in person.
It's amazing. It's all about getting to the magic moment. The first time that I heard the concept of magic moment was from Bees Stone, from his book, Stories a Little Bird Told Me, his experience in Twitter. And basically all these big tech companies now with proper analytics, they can define the magic moment. It's that point where new users, I guess, like properly convert into returning and being active users. In Twitter, they figured out it was following 33 accounts. So they built the entire onboarding experience to make sure that as soon as you signed up, just follow anyone. You just need to hit the 33 threshold. Follow Obama, Elon Musk, it doesn't matter. Just follow someone. So I feel like for Near, the magic moment is hands-on experience doing something on the blockchain that makes you feel like it's really cool. And once again, it inspires you to think what else could be done. Because that's all we need now. We need to convince people that Near as a Web3 future of the internet, open web solution is viable. And it's ironic because I feel that some of the protocols and blockchains may actually have the, how should we call it, the muggle moment. You're using something and it's clunky and shitty and you wonder, what is the hype? Like, this doesn't work that well.
That's right. Yeah, I think I agree on that front. When I think about this, I think of two things actually. Both, so for Near, big piece is UX. I think when people try it in person, they're like immediately get blown away. Like, for example, like I just onboarded my friend who stayed in my house for like the last 4 days. And he was like, oh my God, this is how near actually interaction works. I'm like, yeah, like that exists for like last 2 years. He's, oh my God, this is amazing. So that is definitely a magic moment that needs to be somehow like scaled up a bit. But the other side of it that's still missing, I think, across all of the Web3 ecosystems is the use cases for normal people. Because Solana, for example, did event here. I was talking to the coffee shop owner in San Francisco where Solana Pay did activation campaign. So they did free ice cream and free NFT to people. And so they were able to onboard a bunch of people from the street. But the moment people onboarded, the first thought was, all right, I heard crypto equals something about making money. What is the worth of my NFT? Where do I sell it? And that was like majority of people, according to the owner of the coffee shop. So it seems like we're not in a, we're not in the right place yet as an industry where the moment you onboard people, the first thing they try is offboard.
I know the feeling, and that's why I'm a little bit grumpy towards some of the NFT industry, because I feel like they ruined it for the rest of us. I created a custom NFT for a friend's birthday, and Jordan helped me. I must have been one of the first users of the link drop and the near drop. It was very raw back in the day. I had like an Excel spreadsheet, and I don't know what he was doing. He just copied in a bunch of codes. And he really underestimated my audience. Most people were off their face and not able to use their phone or redeem the NFT. But a handful that did, it was shocking. Everyone asked the same thing. How much is this worth? And I was like, it's a custom NFT made for someone's birthday. A, why would you want to sell it? And B, it obviously has no value. I minted it 3 hours ago to give it out here as a special moment in time. So we definitely have a long way to go. The cool thing is, we just need to prove the technology works, get to that special magical moment, and from there inspire as many people as possible to start their own creations. Because obviously we can't do it all.
Yeah, shout out all last release. Shout out to Jordan too, because he's doing like amazing job in NFT side of the ecosystem. And yeah, it also in a way like partially allowed us to focus on gaming because we're like we're thinking about all these creators, but seems like somebody's doing an amazing job on this other creators, so we can go.
Massive shout out to Jordan. He will definitely be a guest of the podcast. I'll try to get him in. I feel like his story is going to be pretty wild as well. Sasha, I am mindful of your time, and we are almost at the 2-hour mark. Will be interesting to see how much this comes down after I take out all my toilet breaks. Now, as we start wrapping it up, this is a rapid fire question, which the joke is that it usually means it's the second half of the podcast, but I do have a meeting in 5 minutes, so we'll try to blast through them. You are very insightful on the stages of technology, philosophy, sales, working with founders. I'm really intrigued as to the sources of information. Are there any books that you've read recently that have had an impact in you that you would recommend to people? It could be even something further removed in time, just that would be worth for people to consider.
Yeah, I tend to actually look up the book that I actually was downloading recently. I tend to read quite a bit, and it comes in cycles when I have time. I tend to read. There is a book called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. So that's about demographics and some other things about where the world is going, basically away from the globalized world we see today. That's interesting book that I'm just getting started. And as well as a couple of days ago during Independence Day of US, Balaji released his book about how to create new country called Network State. So that's another one I'm reading. Definitely going to be reading it a lot on.
I'm laughing because doing research for this podcast, I went to the Human Guild, the Next Creators podcast. Shout out to your podcast. And I hadn't seen the Shorts channel. And I went into it and I saw myself. Several shorts of the interview we had back in March. And one of the shorts is me recommending this book to you. So maybe we should read it at the same time and have a book club. How does that sound? Too easy. Well, exactly. It's been a pleasure. Sounds like I definitely need to have you back on. And yeah, is there anything else I would like to add before we wrap this one up? Amazing. We'll probably be hitting you up to get some of the references for some of the names and the projects that we've mentioned. And yeah, if there's anything else that you want me to add or take out, let me know. Too easy. Sasha, thank you so much for your time, and we'll keep in touch.
All right.
Thank you. That's the end of another episode. As always, I just want to thank you for listening because, well, let's be honest, you are amazing! And I also want to remind everyone that everything contained in this episode is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast shall be construed as financial, medical, or any other type of advice, and you should always consult with licensed professionals before making any financial decisions. Make sure that you like and subscribe so that you stay up to date with the latest episode. We've got a steamy hot pipeline of guests that will keep you entertained right through the bear market. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon. Bye.